Welcome back to the Snodgrass podcast. Thank you guys for joining me today. I am super excited for today's episode. I have a returning guest, Stein Jr. with me today, y'all. And he is back by popular demand. He was on episode 54. At that time, he wrote a book called Raise Your Game. He was a high-performance coach for a lot of the NBA superstars like Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. He talked about how to reach peak performance in episode 54. Today, he has written a new book called Sustain Your Game: High Performance Keys to Manage Stress, Avoid Stagnation, and Beat Burnout. We're going to really dive into that today, guys. How to manage stress, avoid stagnation, and to beat burnout. I know that if you have reached any level of achievement, you could be in one of these areas. You might have stress day to day in your life. You might have, you're on this plateau or stagnation in your life, or maybe you're just completely burned out and you don't know why. We're going to dive into those today with Stein Jr. But before I do that, make sure you guys go over to YouTube and subscribe to our Iron Deep channel, and go over to the website at irondeep.com. And if you're still interested, we still have just a couple of more signups available for the Men's Awakening Retreat, September the 25th. It's in the Rocky Mountains, guys. 26,000 square foot log cabin, rented out, 30 max guys, business owners. We're all getting together. We're all talking about our identity, purpose, legacy, really digging into our faith with Jesus Christ, and that's what we're going to be doing there. So now I want to introduce you to the one and only Stein Jr. What's going on, Alan?
Oh, not much, man. It's so great to be with you again, Brett.
Yeah, man, super excited. Guys, if you're listening to this, go check out episode 54 in the Snodgrass podcast. I interviewed Alan about his first book called Raise Your Game, and we talked about how to reach peak performance, and Alan's been working with top basketball superstars in the world like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Kobe Bryant, and how they practice their self-discipline. He talked about the unseen hours, right? You talked about that, about how we see their superstar, doing all these crazy basketball things on the TV or live, but it's the unseen hours that gets them to be these superstars. I love your story about Kobe Bryant. Never get bored with the basics. So if you want to listen to how to reach peak performance, go check out episode 54. But Alan, we got a new book we're going to talk about today. We got a brand new book, and this is called Sustain Your Game. So this is really interesting for me because I work with a lot of successful people that have reached a certain level of success in the business world, and but a lot of them end up in a spot or in a season of something's going on. They're lethargic. They've lost some of their edge. They're not as hungry. They experience burnout and all these different things. And that's what we're going to talk about in your new book, Sustain Your Game: High Performance Keys to Manage Stress, Avoid Stagnation, and to Beat Burnout. So let's just get started, Alan. I mean, why'd you write this book? Start us there.
I'm always writing the book that is mirroring what I'm going through in my own life. In essence, I'm writing the book that I need to be reading myself. I find it part liberating and part therapeutic to write and research and formulate ideas around the things that I'm struggling with. And that's the first disclaimer that I want to make, is that whatever I share on page in Raise Your Game or Sustain Your Game, and whatever I share on stage doing keynotes and workshop, these aren't things that I've mastered. I'm still very much a student. These are things that I still am challenged by. And I have found some strategies and some lessons and some approaches that have allowed me to make progress. I'm very proud of the path that I'm on, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that I haven't mastered this stuff yet. And what I found is, and from the Raise Your Game analogy, is kind of being on that climb to reach the proverbial mountaintop. And I do believe that I'll be on that climb for the rest of my life. However, I started realizing over the last couple of years that there are some nuanced differences between what you need to do to reach the proverbial mountaintop and what you need to do to stay there and still have very high levels of joy and fulfillment, to sustain excellence and sustain high performance. And it became very clear to me that the three traits that undermine that are stress, stagnation, and burnout. And I'm no stranger to those three. I've experienced different levels of those, periodically throughout my life. And as I said before, they're not things that I've mastered. I would never sit here and tell you that I never get stressed, but I now have a framework and a mindset that does allow me to lower my stress and feel stress less consistently and less frequently than at any other time previously in my life. So I feel like I'm going in the right direction. And that's the reason for the book, to hopefully set others on the path and put them in the right direction as well.
No, I love that, man. This is such a great book because, again, I've been in that season of high stress. I actually went through just a lot of these feelings that you were talking about the burnout, about just, losing the hunger, losing the edge, feeling the anxiety, the worry, of all these different things. So let's just kind of dive in. Let's just start with stress. So you talk about what do you do to manage and to battle your day-to-day stress? So let's just start with that. I mean, you dove into a lot of different things, and I can bring up some of those things. But let's just start managing your day-to-day stress. You talked about you've came up with a strategy, a system, when you feel stress coming on. So what did you see in yourself and in other high performers in your life?
When I look back on my 46 years of life experience and existence, I can think of a handful of these lightning bolt aha epiphanal moments that someone said something to me, or I read, watched, or listened to something that immediately changed my perspective and put me on a different path. And one of those was I was listening to a podcast interview with a gentleman named Eckhart Tolle, who, for lack of a better term, is a modern day philosopher. I don't know that you can categorize him as any one thing, but I'm a huge fan of Eckhart's work. And he said something that hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, stress is our desire for things to be different than they are in the present moment. And for whatever reason, that just really resonated with me at that moment in time when I heard that. Because what I heard, the unconscious message underlying what he was saying, was that stress is a choice, that we're choosing to be stressed because we're wishing things were different than they actually were. In essence, we're pushing against reality and we're fighting against what is. And that just completely changed, my framework of how I was viewing stress, because previously, like many people, I was viewing circumstances and events and what people say and what people do as the causers of my stress. That when I was feeling stressed, it's because the outside world was imposing itself on me. And here Eckhart saying, no, it's not these forces that are causing you stress, circumstances and events. It's your resistance to them that is causing the stress. So the very first step to me learning how to manage and lower my stress is having a level of acceptance, is saying that, these things that are going on. They might not be to my liking. They might not be my choosing. They certainly might not be my preference, but they're what's happening. And me pushing against or resisting or fighting that is futile. Anytime you try to fight against reality, that is a fight you will lose 100% of the time. So learning how to accept, and instead of putting your energy into fighting against these outside forces, you put them into intentional, thoughtful responses that will allow you to move forward and improve your situation. It's an absolute game changer. And that's the muscle that I've been working on these last couple of years, is when things happen that used to stress me out, I learned to have a certain level of surrender, a certain level of acceptance, and then choose a response that will move me forward. I mean, and these things happen just as frequently and just as often as they used to under the previous paradigm. I just no longer give them the power and give them the control to stress me out. I choose to not push against that. And that has been an absolute game changer. I don't know any other way to describe it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all know that we can't control some of the outside circumstances of our lives. We can only control our response and how we respond to those outside circumstances. And you talk about that in your book, just you can only control some of the controllables, right? So that's what you start to focus in on, is what you can control, and you can control your own response. You also talk about, and I know Eckhart Tolle wrote a book about, I forget exactly what it was called, the title. It was about being present, the power of the moment, something like that. You probably know more.
Power of now.
Power of now, yeah. So I read that as well, and just the power of being present. And you talk about this in your book, like how powerful was it for you just to kind of take a step back and reflect, just to center yourself, to be more in the moment, to be present, even on this podcast, right? It's like, we're on our game typically on this type of setting because I have to be. People are watching, listening, and I have to be on my game. But other times, my mind's thinking about 4 or 5 different things, and I have trouble being in the moment. You talk about this in your book, and any strategy, any tips on what you do to refocus yourself, to be in that present moment?
Oh, well, I'm so glad you went in that direction. And that is one of my biggest challenges still to date, even though this is something I've been aware of for years now, even during the writing of Raise Your Game, was the importance of being in the present moment. And yeah, there are still often times where my mind is very squirrel-like and I'm trying to think of several different things. And, I've tried to get better at reducing the times where I'm trying to multitask and give several things my attention at the same time. So I'm making progress. And to me, that's what's always most important. I was wise enough to throw out the ideal of perfection several years ago. I don't believe perfection is attainable. And even if it is momentarily, it's certainly not sustainable. So for me, I'm much more inspired by progress. And I don't mean to keep patting myself on the back, but I am consistently present more often today than I've ever been at any other time in my life. Just like I consistently manage stress better today than at any time in my life. Now, I'm not sticking a fork in the ground and saying I'm done. I hope that if you have me on your show 2 years from now or 20 years from now, that I'll be able to make the same claim then, that in that time, I'll be handling stress better and I'll be present more consistently than I am now, because it's a constant evolution. But the key is awareness. Awareness is always the first step, because you will never fix something you're oblivious to, and you will never improve something you're unaware of. So the very first step to becoming present is having an awareness of when you're not present, of when your mind wanders, of when you're distracted, of when you should be paying attention to the person in front of you, but you're distracted by your phone or you're thinking about something that you have to do later that day. So just having the awareness and practicing the skill of being aware of when you're not present is what will allow you to course correct and then dial back in and get present. And for context, I do believe in learning from the past, and I do believe in preparing for the future. I just don't believe in living in either one of those spaces and spending too much time or emotional currency in either space. Most of my faculties, I want to be on the present moment. And as you said, certainly during a conversation like this, I want to block everything else out so that you and I can be fully present together to deliver as much value to your listeners as possible. Then as soon as this call is over, whatever is next on my agenda, I want to be able to give that my full undivided attention, whether it's creating a video or writing a social post, whether it's another call, whether it's picking my kids up and taking them out to lunch, whatever's next on my agenda, I want to be all in and all there in that moment. And that just takes practice, and it takes a constant recalibration. There's so many times throughout the day that I catch myself being not present and then just try to refocus that lens.
Yeah. And sometimes we pick and choose on when those present moments are. Like I said, this is easy. We know people are watching. We know people are listening. But when you pick your kids up from school, sometimes that's when we drift into the not present, and we're thinking about all these different things, right? You talk about preparing. You talk about preparing for the future, and how important is it for you to prepare yourself to be focused, to be present? How much does that play in your life, and what's your life look like on your preparing to be present? Because I think that plays a huge part. If we just go and coast, we're not present, right? So what do you do to prepare yourself to be present in the moment?
One of my favorite quotes, and I often speak in quotes because for whatever reason, the way certain people arrange certain words just resonates a feeling very strongly with me. And a previous mentor who's still a friend to this day said something a long time ago that's always stuck with me. And he said, you need to make preparation your separation. Make your ability to prepare one of the things that gives you a competitive advantage, and one of the things that adds value to your life. And I take that, very seriously. As a keynote speaker, I do a tremendous amount of due diligence and preparation to customize every keynote or workshop for every client that I work with. From doing my due diligence on the actual attendees and the industry and getting down terminology, to the preparation of actually rehearsing the customized program. So I do that all of the time. But yes, I want to have the same preparation for each area of my life. Now, what's fascinating about the future, and I think we all kind of know this intuitively, but it's important that we bring it to a conscious level and an intellectual level. And remember that the future doesn't really exist outside of our minds and outside of language. Like, we can use future-based language, and all of us can have mental imagery and visualize and predict what we believe the future will look like. But if we're all being really honest with ourselves, none of us can predict the future. Neither you or me or any one of your listeners can even accurately say exactly what's going to happen later today, much less next week, next month, or next year. Now, that also provides a certain level of uncertainty. And as human beings, we crave certainty as kind of a protection mechanism. So we like to think that we can predict the future. But on some level, very similar to my surrender of letting go of what's going on in the outside world, I'm learning to let go of this constant need for knowing what's going to happen, knowing what the future is going to look like. And that is unsettling, and that is challenging. That's another one of the things we can add to the list that really challenges me to this day, is just acknowledging when it comes to the future, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. However, I can still take steps today to position myself and to position my life to work out rather favorably in the future. So I try and make decisions today that are in alignment with the person that I'm hoping to become. You know, I mean, for me, it's important whether you're talking about the 46-year-old Alan, the 56-year-old Alan, or even the 86-year-old Alan. I want him to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I want him to be doing work he considers meaningful and in service of other people. I want him to have a strong, deep, loving connection with his children and his family and his friends. So if that's the person that I want to be in the future, then I need to make decisions in the present moment that are in alignment with that. So every decision I make in my life, from what I'm going to eat for lunch to who I follow on Instagram to what I watch on Netflix, I ask myself, is this in alignment with becoming that person? And the beautiful part is it lays the foundation and lays the bricks for that future Alan, but it does so in the present time. There's a reason right now at present, I'm physically, mentally, and emotionally fit, or relatively speaking. There's a reason right now in present day time, I'm doing work that I consider meaningful and in service of others. There's a reason present day Alan has a great relationship with his children, family, and friends. It's because those are the decisions that I make on a daily basis. So the way we kind of create our own future, even though we can't predict it, is by the decisions we make in the present day. And that's my goal. Every single day of my life is to consistently make pretty good decisions. And then on the times when I don't, because I'm human, I'm fallible. When I have a lapse in judgment, when I make a boneheaded decision, I say or do something that I kind of wish I had a mulligan on, I've also learned to give myself some grace, give myself permission to be human and make mistakes, and then learn to move to the next play. So I'm not looking to live a perfect day. I'm just looking to consistently make good decisions as often as I can.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Love this. And you're just diving into so many things that hit home with me. You talk about in your book, you go into kind of energy management, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So again, energy management is something that can really help our stress levels. And you talked about a story about someone was giving a presentation on a color-coded life. And I heard about this one time, and I thought it was really, really cool. I think you saw someone's schedule, someone's calendar, and they kind of had these different colors on their schedule, coded in different ways and different fashions. So can you talk about that, and have you done that in your own life? And just dive into that story a little bit.
Sure. So that was actually Coach Buzz Williams, a tremendous college basketball coach, somebody that I've really respected and revered for a lot of years. And, you know, I've had a chance to interact with him on a few occasions. He's just a great guy. And yeah, he is meticulous down to the minute of how he allocates every single day. And I was fascinated by that. I mean, and I saw value in that approach. One of the things that I think is really important for anybody that's kind of in this self-development, self-care, personal development kind of world that we all live in. I mean, my job title is corporate keynote speaker, and my clients are businesses that bring me in to help individual and organizational performance. However, from a consumption standpoint, Alan Stein Jr., I'm always consuming stuff in the self-care, self-development, personal development space. I mean, before we hit record, you and I were talking about the Ed Milet show, which is really a pool that he swims in, quite often. And I think sometimes to the detriment of that space, people often imply that there's only one way to do things. People often have this attitude that, hey, I color code every single minute of my day and you should too. Hey, I get up at 4:30 every morning to lift weights and meditate and drink a green smoothie and you should too. And I certainly hope that nothing in my work makes that implication, because I don't believe that there's one way for any of this. What I like doing is researching and learning about and exposing myself to as many different tools and paradigms and perspectives and ways of doing things as possible. And then I run it through my own personal filter and I figure out what works well for me.
Yeah.
So the Buzz Williams approach of color coding every minute of your day, I found fascinating, and it works tremendously well for Coach Williams and maybe some others. But I'm not that granular in my day. I work better kind of in some block frameworks. Like here's a framework of how I'd like to spend the first hour of my day tomorrow. Here's some time blocked off to do some things work related and calls and podcasts and things like this. And then here's how I kind of want to wind down at the end of the day. But I don't have these things measured out to the minute. So his framework works great for him. Mine works really well for me. Yours might be something in between the two of us, and who knows where all of your listeners are. They could be anywhere on that spectrum. So I think what's most important is not clinging on to our own approaches, but being open to learn from others, potentially even trying other ways of doing things, and then seeing what works. If getting up at 4:30 in the morning and meditating, drinking a green smoothie and lifting weights works for you, wonderful, do it. If it doesn't, then you find a different approach. So to me, that's ultimately what's most important. But to answer your original question, all of this falls under the umbrella of both time and energy management. Time is something, arguably our most precious resource, because it's not renewable. I can't get any of the 46 years back that I've already lived. Energy, however, on the other hand, can constantly be rejuvenated and replenished on a daily basis if we're willing to, dedicate time to self-care. So since I can't get time back, I spend most of my focus on making sure that I can be high energy as consistently as possible.
No, I love that. I love what you said about the color-coded life. Honestly, even me, like to look at granular, just to color code every minute of my life kind of gives me stress.
Yeah.
Right? So I love the block schedule and just kind of what works for you, and a lot of great ideas, but you got to find your own thing that works for you. And let's just talk about routine, obviously, which there's so many different things out there, the morning routine and how important that is about saving time and energy. And one thing I found really, really interesting was you kind of put in your preparation of your evening routine, which I want you to talk about that, because we heard about morning routine, wake up 4:30, drink your green smoothie, work out, get moving, meditate, whatever that looks like. But a lot of times, the evening, we just kind of drift away and whatever happens. And so talk about your evening routine. How has that been important to you, just to have a routine to your evenings?
Oh, I'm so glad you went in that direction, because morning routines get all of the headlines. Morning routines is what everybody talks about, everybody tweets about. That's what's sexy. But I always kind of joke, because it's like the chicken and the egg. What comes before your morning routine? Well, it's the previous night's evening routine or nighttime routine. It's this circular fashion. I understand and have long known as an athlete and as a performance coach, the importance of sleep. Sleep isn't real sexy, doesn't sell a lot of books, actually kind of hard to monetize, but it's arguably one of the most important pillars of our vitality, of our longevity, of our overall health and well-being. Every single function in your body decreases significantly with lack of sleep. Your mental acuity, your ability to focus, your physical energy, your enthusiasm. When we lack sleep, most people will agree you become irritable, you're a little cranky, you have a higher tendency to snap at people. So lowering your sleep will deteriorate and undermine relationships if that's the way that you're behaving. So sleep is absolutely vital. So we need to try and create some type of wind down evening routine that prepares us to get the best night's sleep possible. And once again, very similar to the morning routine, this will vary significantly for people, based on, whether you're single or married, whether you have children, whether you're more of a morning bird or more of an evening owl, when you go to sleep. All of these things are going to make things somewhat different from person to person, but the key is creating some type of system and valuing sleep, because that's what will allow you to feel well rested, so that the next morning you can hit that morning routine, whatever it may be, hit the ground running, and you feel very prepared and ready to go. So, for me, and people actually are heavily surprised by this, I actually watch a fairly significant amount of TV. You usually don't hear people in the self-development space, or certainly not a motivational speaker, admitting to that, because most people say that's a cardinal sin. Right. If you're wasting your life away watching TV, you could be I enjoy a show or a movie that inspires me or piques my interest or educates me. I'm personally very fascinated by acting and directing and cinematography. So when I can kind of, at the end of the day, just kind of unwind, turn my brain off, and watch something, sometimes mindless and humorous, sometimes a little bit more dramatic and thrilling, sometimes educational or inspirational. But when I can just kind of unplug and just let that show kind of consume me, it puts me in a state of feeling very restful to be able to go to bed. Now, for others, that might not work. Maybe you have a different routine, maybe it's reading or doing something else. Everyone's got to figure that out. But point being, everyone should have some semblance of structure to their morning and their evening, and not leave those things up to chance. There's two things about me that I know intuitively that help me with this. One is I'm pretty heavily introverted. Like, I actually need alone time and solitude to recharge my own battery. And two is, ever since I was young, I love structure. I love routine, not to the degree of a Buzz Williams, but I like consistency and structure. But I also recognize not everyone's built that way. To some people, that would be suffocating. It would be claustrophobic for them to have this morning and evening routine. They like some spontaneity. That's fine as well. But at the end of the day, you just need to ask yourself, what am I going to do to prepare myself to get restful sleep tonight? And then tomorrow, when I wake up, what am I going to do to lay the foundation for today to be as productive and as meaningful and as memorable as possible? Those are two really important questions that everybody needs to answer.
Love that. Love that. Awesome stuff. And I just find it fascinating that you just talked about, you watch a significant amount of TV. And it was funny, the other night, I was like, man, I just wanted to laugh. Me and my wife were talking about it. I just want to laugh. And we just started to look up, hey, what's like the funniest sitcom during our age, right? Like Seinfeld or Friends or whatever. Yeah. And just watched one of the funniest ones. It was just fun, just laughing together. So interesting. So we've talked a lot about the stress management, and we're really just going to dive in quickly into these other two that you talk about in your book. The other one, part 2, was about avoiding stagnation, and I think this happens to us, right? We're hungry, we start this business, or we're doing this sport, and we get all hyped up, and we finally get to a certain level of success, and we kind of plateau a little bit, and we just kind of get stagnant. And so I want to dive into that a little bit. You dive in a lot about habits, talk about James Clear, which is a great author of The Atomic Habits, good friend of yours. And you talk about he says you're either driving your habits or being driven by them. So you talk about that and avoiding stagnation, which I know is really important. You also talk about reinventing yourself. So let's just talk about, you can talk about anything you want to on just how does someone avoid this plateau, avoid stagnation? They're kind of in a rut. Talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, stagnation is a fascinating one. Stress we feel right in the moment. Like, we can feel when we're stressed. And burnout, without being over dramatic, often can feel like you've hit this dead end or a brick wall or even that proverbial rock bottom, both of which on either end of the spectrum creates a visceral feeling or a visceral response. Stagnation is a little bit tricky because it's in the middle, and it's often hidden because it's just kind of this numb feeling. It's when you're just kind of towing the line of mediocrity. Some acronyms are being on the hedonic treadmill, where you're just kind of running, but you're not going anywhere. Or if you're in a pool, you're just treading water. You're not making any progress. You're not going anywhere, but you're doing everything you can to just stay afloat. And that can often happen when, as you said so perfectly, we hit a certain level of performance or achievement. Things are going well, and we default to putting on the mental cruise control, and we start living a life of saying, well, this is good enough. This is good enough prevents you from making progress and reaching out to something that's great. It's been my experience, both personal and observational, that when we talk about stagnating, we're usually talking about stagnating our outputs, our results, our achievements, what we're doing. Well, in order to change up our outputs, we have to change up our inputs, because those two things are inextricably connected. What we read, watch, and listen to, and who we invest our time with, those are our inputs. And those things have a huge impact on our outputs. So if you want to level up your outputs, level up your results, level up your performance, level up what you're contributing to the world, then you have to level up the other side of the equation. You have to level up your inputs. You need to start reading, watching, and listening to a higher level of content or something that challenges you. You may need to recruit a new inner circle and people that you are investing your time with, people that might challenge you to a higher degree, or people that maybe have accomplished more than you have at present and are a bit more refined in certain areas and are going to help challenge you to push you forward. So the outputs are always directly related by the input. So anytime I feel like I'm stagnating, the very first thing I do is I shake up the content I consume, and I shake up the people that I invest my time with.
No, I love that. And oh man, this is so awesome. So I had a podcast the other day, and it was funny because I was feeling a little like that, a little stagnant, a little just kind of tiptoeing mediocrity on just on my day, and just having a conversation either with you, or I had another podcast conversation yesterday. And after that conversation, I was just on fire. I just got so much out of it, and I felt alive, and just again consuming, and nothing else changed. All my circumstances were exactly the same, but something, just the inspiration that I got from that conversation. So that's awesome. You talk about reinventing yourself a little bit. So I know I turned 40 a couple years ago, and this was a season of my life. I stepped out of the real estate business a little bit more, and just kind of went through this period of, who am I now? What do I do now? I'm trying to reinvent myself a little bit, and I'm sure you went through that as well. So talk to us about, was there a process in your own life about reinventing yourself? Maybe you can talk about somebody else's life, the story that you have going through that process.
Another quote that really stands out to me, and I think I saw this on a Facebook meme originally, but it basically says something to the effect of, if you're the same man at 40 as you were at 20, then you wasted 20 years of your life. And that just is this constant reminder that we need to keep working towards self-actualization, embrace the ability to evolve and learn in all these different areas of our life, be focused on incremental progress. And sometimes that is just kind of the daily incremental progress, but sometimes it takes a little more of a reinvention of saying, okay, I've been going down this path, and I feel like it might start heading towards a dead end. So now I need to reinvent myself and start going in another direction. And sometimes those things can be very small reinventions. Sometimes they can be bigger reinventions. I mean, for me, one of the bigger ones was 5 years ago when I decided to leave the basketball training space entirely and jump into the corporate keynote speaking and writing space. Now, there were some certain parallels there, and I still very much consider myself a performance coach. I just have a new audience now. But that was a pretty massive reinvention, to leap from one vocation that I had dedicated 15 years to do something completely different that requires different skill sets, different branding, different clientele, different approach. But that was what I needed at that time. I was definitely starting to stagnate in the basketball training space, and I was approaching burnout. So the reinvention for me was just kind of right place, right time. It was the step that I needed to take. But that doesn't mean everyone listening to this needs to rip the massive Band-Aid off and make a giant career change or jump. Sometimes reinventions can be much smaller. It could be picking up a new hobby or trying something different, joining a new club or something else in your community. Anything that just switches up kind of the status quo and will break you out of this stagnant funk, I would consider a reinvention.
How important do you think is this, just going back to kind of challenging yourself a little bit, trying something new, taking a little bit of a risk, getting out of your comfort zone, just doing something a little bit more challenging, whether it's, like you said, like a hobby, like playing guitar, taking up skiing or whatever it is. But how important do you think it is just kind of continually to challenge to grow?
I think it's vital. I think it should be a non-negotiable. Now, the shape that it takes can be different for everyone. What I love to do, and this is just a personal preference, I love to always have something on my calendar, could be 2, 3, 6 months away, that gives me, one, something to look forward to, but two, something to kind of train for and prepare for. Now, the vast majority of things that I personally choose to put on my calendar are fitness related events. Just in the last couple of years alone, I hiked rim to rim of the Grand Canyon. I did a Spartan race. I ran an ultra marathon. Most recently, at the time of this recording, I did a 26-hour Navy SEAL experience. I've got a few things coming up on my calendar, one of which is not going to require physical preparation, but is going to require some mental and emotional preparation. And that's, I'm going to give I'm going to try some stand-up comedy. I'm going to do some open mic nights here in the DC area and give a try to that. Talk about something that will absolutely take me out of my comfort zone. Right. Now, I'm very comfortable being on stage. I'm comfortable with a microphone, and I'm comfortable being in front of people. But that comfort lies in what I share from a corporate keynote standpoint. Right. I can talk about individual and organizational performance for days on end and never even take a breath. But having to switch that up and intentionally be funny and humorous, even for just 4 minutes, because that's all an open mic requires, is going to be really challenging for me. But I'm excited about it, and I'm looking forward to it. And stand-up comedy is something that I've been a huge fan of for a long time. It's something that I study religiously to hopefully improve my ability to be a corporate keynote speaker. But you better believe this will be something new for me. And I actually lean into that kind of unsettling excitement. I mean, I'll definitely have some butterflies, and my armpits and palms will be sweating when I get up on that stage. But I'm looking forward to that, and it'll be a new challenge, and we'll see what happens, So for me, that framework works well. Always having something on the calendar to look forward to, always having something on the calendar to prepare for. Because one thing I know, and this again is through personal experience, firsthand experience and observation, is most people tend to feel happiest and most fulfilled when they're growing, when they're learning something new. Just think how you feel when you read a new book that's got some new ideas. Like, you're excited to put them into practice. You're looking forward to talking to your friends or your spouse or your children later that day and share with them what you learned. You can't wait to tweet about it. Like, you want to tell the world, because now you've got this unbridled optimism and excitement because you're growing. And that's my goal, is I want to keep growing steadily until my time on this planet is up.
Oh, man. That's awesome. And I want to see your stand-up comedy act, by the way, because I know what it's like. I mean, I enjoy speaking and enjoy doing things like that. And I enjoy making people laugh when I speak, but it's a lot different giving a keynote speak when people are not expecting to laugh, and you do make them laugh and you're like, oh, that was awesome. But then having that expectation for them to laugh, it's a little bit different.
Oh, it absolutely is. And that's actually what I'm excited about, is kind of the difference in craft. It's a completely different goal. My goal when I'm on stage as a keynote speaker is to deliver massive value and give practical, actionable takeaways, like things that people could actually put in place that night. Well, it's very different goals in stand-up comedy. The goal is to make them laugh right there in the moment. Right. Now, when you get to like a Dave Chappelle level, and you're a borderline philosopher as well as comedian, like, you're also making people think. You're talking about, societal change. Like, that's why Dave Chappelle, in my opinion, is one of the best to ever do it. But for me at an open mic, it's, can I get people to chuckle, laugh, smile about every 10 to 15 seconds for 4 minutes? Yeah. And that's going to be pretty hard to do. Right. But the reason I love it is the audience is kind of the judge and the jury. If their feedback is immediate, and there's something really fascinating about that, that if they laugh, then whatever I said was funny to them in that moment and it resonated. If they don't laugh, as uncomfortable as that will be, and as awkward as that silence will be, it's still feedback. And what I'm looking forward to is, this isn't going to be a one-time thing for me. This isn't, I'm going to do one open mic and check it off the list. I already plan on signing up for 5 or 6 open mics in the first couple of weeks so that I can try that, that routine out, for lack of a better word, that set out a few different times, and then start to tinker with stuff and go, okay, I've done this 4 or 5 times now. This joke lands every time. This joke, for whatever reason, sometimes gets a laugh, sometimes it doesn't. I need to workshop this a little bit. Maybe this joke that I do at the end, maybe I need to move that to the beginning. So I actually enjoy both the science and the art of tinkering with it and trying to figure that out. And it will also help build some resilience and build that muscle of when you try to say something you think is funny and it ends up getting crickets. That's an uncomfortable feeling, but I want to learn how to grow thicker skin and inoculate myself to that type of feeling.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I love what you're doing because a lot of times you talked about you're 46 years old, I'm 42 years old, and we reach this season and we stop trying new things. We stop being curious about these things and doing these. And I know we could go on and on about this, but that's awesome. I love what you're doing. Let's just talk about this last one, burnout, really quick.
Sure.
The thing I really want to hit on is you say that burnout is the long-term effect of misalignment. What do you mean by that? And just kind of dig into that. Like when someone really gets burned out, what does that mean? The long-term effect of they have a misalignment somewhere.
I think at large, society tends to think burnout is simply from working long hours and making a lot of sacrifices. And that is partially true. It's just incomplete. That's only one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is when you're working long hours and you're making sacrifices, but you don't find meaning in your work. You don't find purpose in your work. You're no longer fascinated by your work. Your work no longer is in alignment with your core values. You no longer enjoy the people you work with or the culture that's been created at your organization. When you no longer think that your work is making a meaningful contribution to something bigger than yourself, that's when burnout starts. It's when those two things splinter in different directions. We all know people, and have most likely have been at some point in our life, where we're logging a ton of hours. We're burning the midnight oil. We're making a lot of sacrifices, but we find so much meaning and fulfillment in what we're doing. We're not at risk of burnout. Now, I would still recommend we put some self-care practices in place because that's not sustainable either, but you're not at risk at burnout when you find meaning in your work. It's when that starts to splinter that we have a problem.
No, I love that. That's amazing. And you're exactly right. A lot of times we just think of overworking, grinding, burning the candle at both ends. And you talk about this the last time, I think the last section of the book, just there's rest and play. And I know sometimes people, they get this stigma of this high performance, you talk about these superstar athletes. And in my mind, I'm like, man, this is all they do. They don't have any room to rest or to play, or they don't have any balance in their life. I mean, do you think that that's true, or is there a different coin, a different side of that as well?
Well, similar to what we said before, it's not a one size fits all model. I mean, you could take somebody. Here's 2 examples that hopefully most of your listeners are familiar with. One is the late great Kobe Bryant, who admittedly was nothing short of obsessed during his playing career. I mean, he put in a lot of hours and made massive sacrifices personally, to be in the gym all of the time, because his goal was to be the greatest that ever played. Now, that framework doesn't bring very much enjoyment to me personally. I don't want to be obsessed, and I don't want to be working as much as he was working. But I actually think for him, he enjoyed that. I think if you asked Kobe if he was happy, he would say, yeah, that was what he wanted to be doing. So it's not necessarily the way I want to live my life, but it worked well for him. Another one is somebody that I have an equal amount of respect and reverence for, and that's Gary Vaynerchuk, affectionately known as Gary V in the social circles and in marketing and on social media. Gary's another one that he enjoys working 16 to 18 hour days, 6 to 7 days per week. He enjoys not taking very many vacations because they don't bring him joy or happiness. And what Gary does a beautiful job of, and one of the reasons I really enjoy and respect him, is he never tells people that that's what they should be doing. He simply has the awareness to know that's what he enjoys. That's where he operates best, that he is a practitioner. He loves building business. He loves being an operator. He loves being, as you said, on the grind for 16 to 18 hours a day. That doesn't work for me. So, what works for Gary and brings him happiness and fulfillment is different than what brings me happiness and fulfillment. And there is no right answer. neither one of those paradigms is right or wrong or good or bad. It's all about what fits us. And to me, that's what's most important with all of the things that we've discussed. And hopefully this puts a nice big red bow tie on it. We all need to be aware of the potential of stress, stagnation, and burnout. And we all need to be developing a paradigm and a framework and a perspective and approach that allows us to manage and beat those different qualities over the long term so we can sustain excellence. But each of our morning routine and evening routine, each of the way we approach these things, the hours we work, all of that stuff is going to be different for everybody. So the key is not playing the comparison game, not trying to run anybody else's race, but figuring out what works well for you. And one of the ways you figure out what works well for you is you figure out what doesn't work well for you. You try some things and you say, you know what, that hat doesn't fit very well. I'm going to try another one. And life should be a constant trial and error of getting in different reps in different ways and seeing what works. And then the oldest adage in the book that leads to both high performance and success is do more of what works, do less of what doesn't.
I love it. That puts a big red bow on it, Alan. So I appreciate you being on the podcast today, man. Guys, go check out #1 Alan's first book, Raise Your Game, talking about how to reach peak performance, and then his newest book, Sustain Your Game, how to manage stress, avoid stagnation, and beat burnout. It's been a pleasure. Alan Stein Jr. on the podcast today. Thanks so much, buddy. It's awesome having you.
Always my pleasure. Thank you, brother.